T. Welcome to the command post. You know what it is. Post up and take command. I, of course, am your commander-in-chief, Louie T. Thank you for joining me. This is part 2 of our off-season series. I told you guys we're going to start really getting the ball rolling. I'm going to try to get the ball rolling a lot earlier on the off-season this year because I really want to dive into the draft heavy this off-season. So in order to do that, I need to start cleaning up some of the free agent things that are going to take place. And I think I'm a little bit more enthused about this offseason because of the potential sale of this organization. I'm not going to lie to you. That's really got me juiced up. So with that said, my guy JP, shout out to my guy John Perez, sent me an article via Twitter. It was from Hogs Haven, which is the SB Nation affiliate for the Washington Commanders. This article was written by Scott Jennings, and it's a really detailed article outlining a mock offseason for the Washington Commanders, what he would do if he were in charge of the organization. And I found it very interesting, which is why I gave you part 1, because his biggest free agent signing is a linebacker. I'll just throw that hint out there and bit of a teaser. And so he goes through what he calls the 3 R's, right? Which is resign, restructure, and release. Okay, these are the 3 things that take place a lot of times with NFL clubs in the offseason, where you're looking to free up cap space, you're looking to hand out contracts, and find ways to reduce cap numbers for guys that maybe are underachieving or you're thinking about cutting, but they want to stick around with the organization and are willing to take a pay cut. And so you go to some guys, say, hey, are you willing to restructure? And so you find those candidates and see if you can't free up a little bit more cap space for you to be able to play with. That said, he goes through the list of 3 R's. He's assuming that the cap space is going to be, you know what, let's just get into it, right? So this is what he wrote for the 2023 salary cap, okay? It is estimated by Tom Pelissero, which is the insider for NFL Network, that the 2023 salary cap could exceed $220 million. I tend to stay pretty conservative here, so under this assumption, that should give the Commanders around $12 million before the 3 R's take place. So if the salary cap is $220 million, and it's going to steadily increase with the TV money hitting in these coming years and all these new contracts. They're about to get a new contract with potentially YouTube to take over Sunday Ticket and all of that stuff. So more revenue means more space for these teams to operate. 220 is what the premise he's working with. So that should give Washington, because remember the salary cap was 208 last year, roughly somewhere in that neighborhood. Washington spent pretty much all of their money, which is why they had to cut some guys and couldn't make too many moves when we had, some issues at corner. We had to go the cheap route because we didn't really have any cap space. So that puts us at roughly $12 million before the 3 R's, as I just mentioned, resign, restructure, and release take place. The first thing is resign. So obviously, Daron Payne is the first order of business. We've talked about this already. When it comes to this team and the identity that we're trying to establish, it starts up front on the defensive line, in the middle with Allen and Payne. To me, that is our identity defensively right now. Offensively, I want our identity to become Brian Robinson and the 3 receivers, and those two feeding off one another, running the football, setting up play action fake, getting chunk plays with these explosive and dynamic receivers. So I think the first order of business is re-signing Daron Payne. And so he writes, Payne is Washington's biggest free agent this offseason. The contract the team gave to Jonathan Allen, Captain Jonathan Allen, should be where the front office is heading, plus inflation. Payne is still young. He turns 26 in May, and it's important to keep the nucleus of the team together along the defensive front. So I totally agree with this, and I want you guys' opinion on this as we go through it. Again, we'll discuss this on Thursday night live and see what you guys have to say, but I wanted to bring this to your doorstep right now. So then he goes, the contract for Daron Payne looks like this: 4 years, $75 million. I think Jonathan Allen's was 4 years, $72 million. So he said you add in the inflation that the cap has gone up, cost of living has gone up, all that good stuff, and you get to 4 years, $75 million. Cap hit of $8 million in the first year of the contract in 2023. I told you guys, Wes Schweitzer is my homie. He can come to the family cookout, right? Like, Wes Schweitzer's invited. He can play all 3 interior offensive line positions. He's a badass. He competes. I told you, I would love to have Wes Schweitzer back. Personally, he's not a part of the problem. He's a part of the solution. Clearly, Our guy Scott Jennings feels the same way. He said Schweitzer is a valuable asset on the interior of the offensive line, being able to play guard or center. So he wants to bring him back on a 2-year, $10 million deal with a cap hit of $3 million in 2023. I got no problems with that. Sign me up for 2 more years of Wes Schweitzer. Then he says Jeremy Reeves, All-Pro Revo, was exactly that. He lived up to the moniker All-Pro Revo, making the All-Pro team the only Washington Commander to do that this season, also making it to the Pro Bowl, one of 3 Commanders to make the Pro Bowl this season. Jeremy Reeves named to the Pro Bowl, an All-Pro team as a special team star. He's earned a new contract here in D.C. I agree with that as well. I don't see anything wrong with that. 3 years, $10 million, cap hit of $2 million for a guy that has done it the hard way, really, got it out of the mud here in Washington. And Jeremy Reeves, love Revo, and would like to see him stick around for many more years to come. So I agree with everything that has been done to this point. I don't know what says you, but we move on to the next piece of the offseason, which is the release portion of the 3 Rs. And these are the guys that he would release this offseason to free up cap space. Carson Wentz, we know he's getting released. That's not up for debate. $26.2 million of savings there. That's going to happen. That's a thing. Logan Thomas is debatable. I've seen where this is gaining traction. I still think he is a leader in that locker room. I think that's a guy that they really think wasn't healthy at all this season until the latter portion of the season. And I don't think they really think he was the reason that he wasn't successful. Even his wife tweeted out, and Thomas didn't shy away from it. Like, I didn't get my opportunities. I think that's a Scott Turner. What was I screaming all year long, starting from the start of the season, before we got underway and played a single game? We have to use the size that we have in the red zone. Cam Sims, Logan Thomas, Cole Turner. It never happened. And so I think Ron Rivera and company, I don't know if they'll go penny pinching and chasing the $5.2 million that they can save on releasing Logan Thomas. I don't see that happening. Now, he's pushing 30, if not pushing 30 on the wrong side of 30. They could easily decide to go in a different direction. He was a bit unhappy at the end of last season, not only with the opportunities that he was getting or lack thereof, but also with the benching of his, best friend on the team and Taylor Heineke. Maybe they decide that he's no longer, their ally, and they decide to move on from Logan Thomas and bring in some fresh blood. I don't know. I doubt it. I think they view Logan Thomas, like when Ron refers to talking to captains on the team and kind of gauging the temperature of the locker room, he's talking about talking to guys like Logan Thomas. I don't think he's going anywhere, but Scott Jennings would cut Logan Thomas and save $5.2 million. What says you? Chase Rouillet, $4.3 million savings if they move on from him. That's a tough one for me, bitter pill to swallow, because I love Chase Rouillet. I feel somewhat responsible for his demise here in Washington because I was so adamant that we don't have issues at center. We don't get injured at center. And literally like a week and a half, 2 weeks later, he injures himself against Green Bay for the first time, comes back after a extensive rehab in the offseason, only to injure himself in week 2 on one of the final plays of the game against Detroit, and lost him for the season yet again. It's tough, man, because that's become an unreliable position for us, and not because of his ability to play. If he stays healthy, Chase Rouillet is a really good center in this league, but he hasn't stayed healthy the last 2 years, and it's really hurt us on the interior of the offensive line. Maybe they decide to go in a different direction. Listening to Ron Rivera and Martin Mayhew, it sounded like they were done with the center position altogether, with both Chase Rouillet and the backup to him, being that both guys got injured and didn't finish the season each of the last 2 seasons. It sounded like him and Tyler Larson were both expendable this offseason. Larson's contract is expiring, so they just don't have to re-sign him, whereas Rouillet signed a big deal a couple of off seasons ago, hasn't been healthy since. You could save $4.3 million if you go in a different direction. Cornelius Lucas signed a 2-year contract last year to come back to the team. Cutting him would save you $2.8 million. I don't think they believe in creating a hole on an offensive line that is already Swiss cheese, where they have to do things probably at all 3 interior positions. Much like I've said about Charles Leno, I don't know if they view Charles Leno as the long-term solution, but they don't see him as a problem necessarily right now that they have to upgrade, where you already have to upgrade guard, center, guard at this moment Will they move on from? Is the tackle of the future on the right side or left side even on the roster right now? Because Sam Cosmi's inability to stay healthy, maybe he's more of a guard than he is a tackle. I don't know. I can just tell you this: he's gonna solve one of those two positions if healthy. Sam Cosmi is. Whether that's guard or tackle remains to be seen. But cutting Cornelius Lucas can save you $2.8 million. Is it really worth $2.8 million to get rid of a quality swing tackle in this league and go searching for one next year potentially? I don't think that's the right thing to do. You can still draft a guy and keep Cornelius Lucas. And then if you get that guy in your building and you're wowed by his ability and you feel like this is the guy that we're going to start, and worst case scenario, if we got to kick Cosmi out there, we can. We got our guys. Then you can cut Cornelius Lucas. I don't think you do that at the start of the offseason. I don't think that makes a ton of sense if you get where I'm going with that. I first need to make sure that I obtain the starting left and right tackle. If that guy's going to remain Charles Leno Jr. on the left side, I need to make sure that either Sam Cosmi is the right tackle for us starting moving forward, or I've got that guy via the draft or free agency already on the roster. That's the only way you can cut Cornelius Lucas. If you don't already have a guy that we're not penciling in, we're writing his name in pen or Sharpie at right tackle, you can't cut Cornelius Lucas, because you can always say, hey, worst case scenario, and you just want a really quality swing tackle. They're hard to come by. You've got one here in Cornelius Lucas. Why cut him if it's only costing you $2.8 million? We shouldn't be penny pinching at this point, especially if you're going to go with Sam Howell and you're not investing a massive amount of money in the quarterback position. You should be able to hold on to a guy like Cornelius Lucas for 2.8. That's pennies on the dollar, essentially. Andrew Norwell, savings of $2.3 million at guard. I would totally do this, okay? I would totally move on from Andrew Norwell. It was a one-year experiment that didn't go as well as we had hoped. And he wasn't terrible. He just wasn't good enough. His inability to move consistently, he wasn't terrible as a pass protector, but he wasn't good enough. He wasn't good enough. The interior of this line simply was not good enough, and he was a part of that problem. And so I'm all for $2.3 million being saved under the cap by moving on from Andrew Norwell and seeing what we can do, whether that guy's Chris Paul already on the roster, or you go out and you sign a guy in free agency, or you go out and you draft a guy in the earlier rounds, 1 through 4, somewhere in there, you draft a guard to come in and man up one of the guard positions. Andrew Norwell nor Trey Turner should be on this roster. Turner signed a 1-year deal. Norwell signed a 2-year, $10 million deal. Norwell is the one that has to be released. I say do it. So with all of those from Scott Jennings, you end up with $40.8 million of caps savings. So you add that to the 12 that we already had. Now you've got roughly 52, almost $53 million worth of cap space to play around with. Now we're not done though. Scott's not done. He's going to restructure Kendall Fuller. Fuller was on a 4-year, $40 million deal, right? When he signed in Washington. Now you restructure that deal, okay? And instead of him, he's on the last year of that 4-year, $40 million deal. So I want him back. I can't speak for you. I want Kendall Fuller back. He's only 27 years old. He's still young, man. I want Kendall Fuller back. So with that said, you restructure him, you give him a 3-year, $36 million deal, and that reduces the cap number down from roughly $11 million, which would have been in his final year of that $40 million contract, and it's now a $5.25 million cap hit in 2023. Save $6 million. I got no problems with that. And you restructure a guy that we want here, at least for the next, Big Ziti, my ass, okay? Okay, he was absolutely fantastic for us this season. We had 2 pick sixes, both belonging to Kendall Fuller. Bake Ziti, my ass, okay? I digress. And so now you add the $6 million into the 52.8 we've already had. Now you got 58.8 million. So you're roughly working with, $60 million worth of cap space. Now you go in, right? Now you start going in and playing around with some of this money. Now, obviously, the money that you have saved here with the releases and the restructure plus the $12 million, you've spent some of that already. You spent some of that on Deron Payne, right? You spent some of that on All-Pro Revo, and you spent some of that on Wes Schweitzer. So you take that out of the equation, and you're left with $46 million. After the dust settles and the smoke clears, you got $46 million to play around with in free agency. Remember, you also have to put in and bake into that total when you draft your players, you got to have money allocated to sign those guys. But we'll worry about that, down the road. Let's talk about the free agents that he's going out and signing. I told you, I teased at the top of this that he was signing a linebacker and spending the most money on the linebacker position of any position in free agency. He's going after Tremaine Edmonds. 25 years old in Buffalo, 5 years, $85 million. I told you a deal like that would probably run you anywhere from 75, 80 to 85, maybe even north of 85 to 87, $90 million. He's got 5 years, $85 million, which, if I'm not mistaken, 5 years, 85 is roughly, I told you it was going to be 16 on the part one of this when we talked about linebackers in particular. I think I told you a guy like Tremaine Edmonds is going to be somewhere, because Roquan Smith is $20 million. That's the benchmark, right? $20 million inside linebacker per year. Tremaine Edmonds, no one in free agency, none of the guys I showed you is commanding that kind of deal. But Edmonds is the next step down, and that's probably going to be in the $16 to $18 million range. I think this is like something like $17 million per year. Let me get out my calculator and quickly do some math. I think it's, if I had to guess, to say 17. Yep, $17 million a year. So, let's see, hold on a second. So that's a hefty deal, but one I'm willing to spend if you're getting that kind of a player at that age, prime of his career. We need it in the front seven. That's what's really hurting us in the run game, in the pass game. We're not good enough at linebacker. We all can identify that. That's one of the things that we look at and we say we need to get better there. Caleb McGarry, right tackle for the Atlanta Falcons, 28 years old, 4 years, $68 million, $7 million cap hit. He's going that route in free agency. I don't have a problem with Caleb McGarry. We played against the Falcons. We played against Caleb McGarry. He kicked our ass. They ran the football on us effectively. I wouldn't have a problem bringing him in and having him be the starting right tackle. That's why he was so comfortable, Scott Jennings, that is, was comfortable releasing Cornelius Lucas, because you bring in Caleb McGarry. He's also, they did a mock draft. I'm not going to share that with you right now. We're going to talk about that at a later date and time. But they also drafted a tackle in the draft, which allowed them to move on from Cornelius Lucas comfortably. So I'm not willing to do that yet because I need to see what we have before. It's $2.8 million isn't going to break the bank. You don't have to make that move immediately. You can make that move post June 1 if you so choose, right? If you want to open up an opportunity for someone to get playing time or have someone else be the swing tackle, not named Cornelius Lucas, and you want to save roughly $3 million, go right ahead. But make sure you have those replacements in-house already before you do that. He's signing Caleb McGarry. He's drafting a guy, so that allows him to make the move on Cornelius Lucas. I don't have a problem with Caleb McGarry. And we'll take a look at some of the tackles and, guards and some of that stuff that's out there as the offseason. We'll do this. We'll go through each position that we need thoroughly and talk about those guys and see which ones make the most sense. 4 years, $68 million, solid deal for a really solid right tackle. Mike Gesicki, you guys know how I feel about Mike Gesicki. And as Rio says, his gentrified gritty. I would love to see him here in Washington having a gritty off with Casey Toohill. It would be one for the ages. That said, at 27 years old, this kid is dynamic. Something we haven't had at the tight end position since Jordan Reed and Vernon Davis. That's what Mike Gesicki would add to this offense. I'm sick and tired of us having these slow slogger type tight ends that don't move very well, that don't create mismatches down the field. Here's a guy in Mike Gesicki, and maybe they think Cole Turner is that guy, that he can provide us some of the fireworks that Mike Gesicki has produced in his career. Remember, Mike Gesicki had a down year, so he's not going to cost as much as he would have, say, last year when he was coming off of a career year. He had a down year this season. They franchise tagged him in Miami, and for whatever reason, they did not throw him the football the latter portion of this season. So he's not going to command as much as he would have, say, last year. This number would have been higher than $36 million. I'm cool with 3 years, $36 million for Mike Gesicki for what he can provide for this offense. He can go up and get the football. He can run away from DBs. He's an athletic freak. I'd love to add a guy. That's only if you're moving on from Logan Thomas, which I don't think they're going to do. But If Logan Thomas is no longer in the picture, then you need a TE1. Mike Gesicki would fit that role. I think there are going to be some really good tight ends available in free agency. Obviously, we saw what Evan Ingram did for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think that's a little too rich for our blood. I don't even know if that's something that we should do. But I'm on board with Mike Gesicki at 27 years old, 3 years, $36 million, $5 million cap hit. Again, this is only if you move on from Logan Thomas. If Logan Thomas is on this roster, you can't sign Mike Gesicki. You can't sign a veteran tight end, okay? So we'll see what happens there. Cody Ford at guard/tackle. He's a guard. We're not going to even play that game of guard/tackle. Yeah, sure. He played tackle at Oklahoma. He can play tackle in a pinch. But Buffalo identified him as a guard, traded him to Arizona where he played guard. He is a guard. Okay, we're not going to play the guard tackle game. But he can play tackle in a pinch. 3 years, $18 million. That feels real Wes Schweitzer-ish, which is exactly what I'm looking for, right? If you're looking, he's a road grader, a physical guy in the run game. I think he leaves a little bit to be desired in the pass game as a protector, but you can circumvent that. You get a good center in here, he'll be fine as a guy inside that can protect, but he is a mauler inside as a run blocker. So love Cody Ford and what he could potentially bring. And again, it gives me Wes Schweitzer vibes if you go that route. We signed Wes Schweitzer 3 years, $13 million, I believe it was. Back in 2020, and look what we've gotten out of him. I'd love to do something similar here with a guy like Cody Ford on the interior of the offensive line. It would help shore up that group. And then Andy Dalton, 35 years old, backup quarterback, 1 year, $3.5 million. I don't want any parts of Andy Dalton. You might as well bring back Taylor Heineke. Now, Heineke may make not slightly. He's going to make more than $3.5 million. Hell, I think Andy Dalton's going to make more than $3.5 million. But that said, if you're going to go that route, we've talked about this. And maybe you just don't want Heineke back. Scott's not here. You don't want Heineke back anymore. You think that may cause some controversy. I've already given you the scenario. My guy Derek B laid it out where, Sam Howell starts to struggle. There's still enough of the Heineke hive that exists that says, hey, put Heineke in. He's better than this guy. He's a bum. And all of a sudden, you got Sam Howell looking over his shoulder. I don't know if that exists. Heineke's already, it's not Heineke. He won't be a problem. Heineke won't be clamoring for playing time. So we're talking about the fans. We're talking about pressure externally from the fan and fan base, and maybe even the media starting to ask, hey, have you considered going to Taylor Heineke with the team's current struggles and Sam Howell struggling? If you want to remove that from the equation, then you bring in Andy Dalton, right? Because no one's excited clamoring to see Andy Dalton, right? Nobody's, hey, you should bench Sam Howell and put Andy Dalton in. Nobody's saying that. So I could see why they would decide to go that direction. I tell you, whatever direction it is, it's going to cost more than $3.5 million. I can assure you that. Andy Dalton's going to make more than $3.5 million. And whomever they bring in as a backup quarterback, including, Taylor Heineke, it's going to cost more than $3.5 million. I don't agree with that one. I'll bypass on Andy Dalton. I'd prefer a guy like Taylor Heineke or a Jacoby Brissett or somebody a little bit more mobile. Jacoby Brissett isn't even really my cup of tea as a backup. I told you I like my backups dangerous. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I just like my backup quarterbacks dangerous. Something's going to happen when they come in the game. Andy Dalton, he fits that description. Either he's going to throw some picks or he's going to throw some touchdowns, but he's going to do something. Jacoby Brissett is meh. Anyway, I don't want Andy Dalton. I'd rather have Taylor Heineke back if we're going to go that route. But total cap hit with all these moves he made, $26.5 million. And then he writes down as an asterisk, okay, just as an aside. There are some bigger name. These are just the bigger name targets, the ones where you're going to spend the most money on. He said that he'd like the team to pursue. He said there will be a few smaller signings to fill roster spots and needed depth, which we all assume, right? These are the big names. There'll be some smaller name guys that get signed here that you don't mention on this list, but $26.5 million. So you roughly, exercised, slightly 60% roughly of your cap space. You've got roughly $20 million left to play around with and sign some smaller name guys and sign your draft picks, things of that nature. What we'll do is we'll come back down the road and we will take a look at the mock draft that they put out that coincides with this. That'll be part 3 of this series. And then we will have the cipher complete. And you'll be able to then digest everything. By Thursday, you would have watched all 3 parts of the series, and then we can then discuss, is this a good offseason plan? Do you agree with what they've done, and would you be on board? Or what modifications would you make to this plan. I think it's a sound foundation. I like a lot of what was done there. I'll give you my full opinion on some of the things. I've given you most of it, right? But I'll give you an overall view of what I feel, and I'm looking for that from you as well. So that's gonna do it for me, your man Louie T. That's just a little food for thought. You guys do the dishes. You know what it is. Post up and take command. I'll see you guys next time. That was part 2 of the series. Be on the lookout for part 3, and then we'll discuss it all on Thursday night. Have a good one.
LouieTeeNetwork.